So I am delighted to be joined by Sean Maywood, who is the mental health literacy lead at PwC. And Sean and I are going to be talking about mental health, and particularly mental health in the workplace, as Mental Health Awareness Week is coming up shortly. And this year it has a particular focus on loneliness. So we're going to touch on that in a moment. But Sean, first of all, thank you so much for joining me. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today. And the first question I'd love to get your take on is, particularly as we're coming out of the pandemic and we're all sort of working in slightly different places at slightly different paces, how do we as colleagues and employees, how do we stay meaningfully connected with one another, especially sort of working in a hybrid environment?
Thanks. Hi, Louise, and I'm really happy to join you. I think the first thing to say here, and I'm probably going to use this word a few times during this, is acknowledging first and foremost that this is it's still a challenging time. We're coming out of the pandemic, and if we think back to March 2020 when we all went into the pandemic, we went into it together. A lot of us were told to work from home all together, and actually a lot of us, as frustrating as it was that we couldn't physically see each other, we did connect through things like Zoom, as we're on now, and we connected quite well, and there was that real feeling of togetherness. And certainly in my firm at PwC, there was a real natural checking in process that was going on, and we were putting in coffee catch-ups and so on and so forth, and people were asking, how are you, and actually really meaning it. And I think what we need to remember now is that we need to keep that going. I think there's a lot of people that will see some positives that came out of the pandemic. People focused in a positive way on mental health, more people realized that it was a thing, because they felt that anxiety, those anxious moments throughout it, and perhaps they'd never experienced that before. And I think that showing care towards each other was something that definitely happened and might have drifted away a little bit now. We can assume that we're all okay as we're moving back, when actually there'll be real differences in the way people are feeling. There'll be some people who will still be fearing the virus itself, but for others, those concerns might be around, how do I navigate the office politics again? So I think, how do we improve that? I think we just need to do the basics, if you like, of continuing to check in on each other, not assume, and acknowledge what a difficult time it is still for everyone.
Great, thanks so much, Sean. And I love that checking in on assumptions and just taking that moment to kind of pause and not just rush straight back into kind of life as it was before. I think that's a really, really powerful reflection. Thank you. Going to be picking up on kind of, I guess, some themes again in this kind of second question, but I touched on the fact that loneliness is a key kind of theme this year for Mental Health Awareness Week, and I know especially with the pandemic, people really would have felt those feelings of isolation and loneliness, not necessarily because they've been on their own, but just because it's been quite a tough, isolating time, really. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for people who are feeling disconnected, to help them re-engage professionally and even personally, and whether you've also got any advice for teams and colleagues to support people who might be feeling disengaged.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there will be an element of repeating myself from before within that, but I think I use that word acknowledge. Accept it. I have felt lonely and isolated, and in some ways more so during this hybrid point. And I've probably been guilty of being particularly British amongst that, and not asking for connection with others. And I think on an individual basis, we shouldn't be too afraid to do that, because probably, as I know, actually, when I speak to people, once you, whether it is still via a Zoom call or whether it is in an office, people are only too keen to reconnect with you. You know, we're all feeling that. We, you know, sometimes it can almost feel overwhelming as we're catching up on our social life that's been put on hold. On a practical side, you know, how do we keep those connections going? I mentioned coffee catch-ups. We did a bit of coffee roulette in our team, because we would start off back in the pandemic with people meeting as a whole group, and then you'd quickly realize that actually who ends up talking in a whole group? Well, it will be the talkers who talk, and then you've got the listeners who will listen. And when you start to break that up into smaller groups, so we actually broke our bigger team up, and we had these smaller groups of 2 or 3 people that could mix and continue to chat with each other. And I just don't see any reason why we would stop doing that now. I think it's going to be a challenge for some of us to get back into the office as well. We have to acknowledge that it does feel uncomfortable, and maybe we're worried about the time that we've initially gained and then subsumed into the rest of our working day, and how possibly are we going to go back to working those longer hours, which we seem to have ended up doing, and commuting at the same time. But I was only talking with a colleague today, and you know, I don't want to commute, if I'm honest with you. I don't want to do that, but I genuinely gain an awful lot of energy from meeting with people face to face. So where there is that good reason to get into the office and meet with your colleagues, human beings are social creatures, and it was unfortunate at the start of the pandemic we started picking up that phrase socially distancing, when actually we didn't want to socially distance. We wanted to socially connect, physically distance, but socially connect. And yeah, I guess it works from my point of view. I guess it works from both ways. I think we as individuals shouldn't be too afraid to reach out and ask for that connection, because, as I said, I think that the person you ask is going to be only too keen to connect with you. But also in the workplace, find ways for creating those. Is it a meeting that you can get everyone reasonably together for it? When we're working, maybe think about how we work in a hybrid environment as well. We might have people working in the office together and then a few people dialing in. We had a meeting yesterday where we had exactly that, and actually what we had was a group in an office, but we were all on our laptops as well. So we could enjoy the social contact of people physically with us, but those people who were dialing in were seeing individuals on a screen, and they felt fully connected. There's a couple of things that I'd suggest.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, what I love about that is you provide some really kind of practical ideas, but also that sense of all those, like, I think quite ingenious ideas that we created during lockdown because we had to, about not abandoning them, but just transforming them. So I love your idea of coffee roulette and kind of enabling different peers to connect together, because they might not necessarily, if you don't work in the same team, if you don't work in the same physical space, you might not necessarily connect. But actually, if you've got something like coffee roulette, maybe that would be something that would be possible.
Yeah. And I think the recognizing, I was speaking with a psychiatrist. There's a lovely guy who works with us at the firm called Phil Hopley, and he talked about what we've missed out on, and this speaks to the loneliness part. We're trying to take the theme of loneliness and turn it into connection for next week. That's what we're going to have a big focus on. And he's talked in the past about the tiny connections that we have, that we almost haven't realized we've missed out on. So when you walk to the station, that person that does the same commute as you, and you might only nod to them on the platform, but you haven't done that in so long, and you kind of realize how affirming that was, that look that you have, when you get into your office, who are the people that you don't necessarily work with, but you'd always say hello to them. Maybe you say hello to them at the coffee machine. So any way that we can rekindle those or recreate them in another way is important for us. One lovely idea, I must share this with everyone, because I think it's great. Someone's come up with the idea of a tea porty for next week, which is an idea of a Zoom call where everyone includes their pets. And so it's the connection that you have with your pets, but what a lovely way to break down barriers, and excuse for a whole group of people to get together. So it's a virtual do, as it were.
I love that. A bit of social ammunition as well, isn't it? When you're sort of potentially run out of talking about what you're going to have for dinner that evening. So
yeah.
Great, thank you, Sean. I've just got a couple more questions. So obviously you mentioned you're with PwC, and it'd be great to get your insight about what PwC are doing for Mental Health Awareness Week this year to support that sort of mental health in the workplace.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been embracing it for many years. It is a big focus for us, and we've got a week of activities. We often talk about the 5 ways to well-being that the New Economics Foundation, Public Health England came up with quite a few years back, and so those 5 ways to well-being kind of fit with 5 days of the working week. And interestingly, the first one is connection. So we will, we'll be promoting connection within our teams, but we've also got a live stream running where we've got a panel of people from PwC and a couple of experts externally talking about the impact of loneliness, but how we can manage that. Exercise is another one of those 5. So we've got a platform that we use called Move the Nation, and we're encouraging teams to get together and embrace some kind of activity where they'll do it either physically or virtually together. It could be a step count, or even minutes of a more static exercise that they'll do. Giving, well, we in the following week we have a charitable day called One Firm One Day, and so we're encouraging people next week to think about how they'll be planning to do that work, together for communities around. You then got Keeping Learning, and we partnered a while ago with the Samaritans, and there's some lovely training. It's actually available through the Samaritans website, called Wellbeing in the Workplace, and there's a few activities. So we're encouraging people to embrace that, improve their awareness. And then the last one is mindfulness, of course. And so whether people use apps like Calm or Headspace is particularly popular with us, or whether they do their own informal mindfulness activity, going for a walk without your earphones in, that's the kind of, we want to make it so it's a full week, but also sustainable. And this has been a message we've pushed across all the time, that it's Mental Health Awareness Week next week, and the week after, and the week after. We rightly celebrate it, but we want people to be fully engaged. And another small one that we do, we get the green ribbons, and we've shown people how to use a Bitmoji, so they can create their own Bitmoji for their emails who's wearing a green ribbon. And mine's now been on my email for more than 12 months. It's been there, so, and no one's told me off about it. So so yeah, it's a raft of activities that we hope are practical, they're engaging, but they're ones that people will continue to do after that week.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, you sort of reminded me that it's about those sort of micro behaviors, and finding, I guess, also what works, because each individual is different. So what works for one person will be different to what works for another person. So even if someone just takes one activity on one day, something small, it's starting that journey.
Definitely. It's got to be achievable.
Mm.
and sustainable. And if it's, you know, exercise is one that is dear to my heart, and you know, I'm afraid the argument is one for anyone who's thinking, oh, here they go about exercise again. Exercise is good for the body and the mind, but you don't have to be running a marathon to get the benefit from it. It could be as little as 10 minutes a day of a just walking that will lift mood. So starting with something that's sustainable is absolutely right.
Great. And that kind of, I guess, homes us down into this, my last question, which I know is going to be a challenging one for you, which is, do you have just kind of one thing, if you could just pick one thing that you would encourage people to try out or to think about during Mental Health Awareness Week, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I will admit to cheating a bit. I mentioned those 5 ways to well-being, and you know, if you could condense those into one and think about it in that way, then I would say that we've had a long-running campaign around physical health involving eating 5 fresh fruit and veg a day, and I would love people to think more proactively about their mental health. We're often, you know, not just my firm, but many places will have these wonderful stories of where people have experienced, you know, incredible challenges in their life around their mental health, and how supportive everyone has been. But I'm really passionate about how we can move that agenda on, where people are thinking more proactively. You know, we all have mental health for a start,
Mm.
and we don't think of it in that way. We tend to think of our mental health in the negative. And a classic example, I would say, is that as I shared with you before the call, I've recently been on a cycling holiday. And if I was to say to a group of people, I've taken a few days to go away cycling for my physical health, I think most people would think, oh, well, yeah, Sean's improving his fitness. If I turn around and said I'm taking 5 days for my mental health, I think most people would think something has challenged me and driven my mental health into a poorer space. And I think we need to think about it in that more proactive. So thinking about those, you know, connections, the exercise, the giving, the keeping learning, and the mindfulness, the taking time out. I would say I call it one as the 5 ways to well-being. If you're going to make me pick one in the modern world that we're in, I'd probably say everyone should give a bit of mindfulness a go. And that doesn't have to be sitting on the floor with your fingers and thumbs together, humming om. You know, it could be as simple as going for that walk, as I said, without your earbuds in, listening to the sounds around you when you're having your lunch, tasting your food properly. But we're ever connected, sometimes in a negative way, through those mobile phones that we have, and we just need to put them to one side and give our minds a bit of a break.
Sean, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you. I thought it was going to be a quite big, chunky one, but I really appreciate you kind of enabling all those kind of smaller tips as well. I'm a big fan of mindfulness, and I've only come to it, I think, in the last 2 years, really. So if I can do it, I know it's really achievable for pretty much anyone. But thank you so much, and I really appreciate you sharing all your time with us today.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you.